Okay guys, so it's the Obi-Wan finale. Now I'm going to be talking a little bit about no spoilers first of all. But if you haven't seen it, this episode is going to contain spoilers. So as always, I'm Al. This is a Geek in Review and let's get to it. So there was rumours that we're going to get over an hour or an hour and a half episode, and it wasn't much longer than the standard Obi-Wan episode that we've been getting the last 6 weeks. And, you know, as a finale, this is really going to divide people. For me, it didn't really work. Certain things did. Obi-Wan's journey, I felt, or the arc of the journey for this story was resolved. It could set up a lot of new things, either a second Obi-Wan series or maybe a spin-off involving other characters. Even some ones that weren't focused that heavily on in the initial 6 episodes but were present. I'll speak about that later on in the review. But with the fights and things, that felt kind of a little flat. I mean, there's a great scene, the sort of finale where he's fighting Vader, and Vader reacts kind of the way that when he was first put into the suit in Revenge of the Sith. But a lot of the direction in this finale didn't make sense, and again, I don't think the volume really helped them. It looked as if they were very limited during these fights, and you know, depending on the way you look at it, there's one fight or there's one fight that's sort of split into two because it pauses for a bit. But then the fight is intercut with action that's happening on another planet. And I know that Star Wars is known for the sort of multi-battle endings, and that's fine. But the pace of these two scenes and these two sort of fights is totally different. So when you're watching one, you're in the middle of watching these two guys hit each other with a lightsaber. And then when you're watching the other, you're just kind of watching blackness in the desert. And it's not that particularly interesting or compelling. Now, it's not to say there are things that I didn't enjoy in this episode. There are. I'm going to talk about them later on. So this is where we get into the spoiler part of the review. So this is your warning if you haven't seen the episode. So all roads lead to Tatooine, and Reeva is there first and seemingly fine after getting stabbed in the chest. I mean, I'll need to re-watch it, but I didn't even notice if there was any sort of mark on her chest armour. But yeah, how deep did Darth Vader go with that lightsaber in the last episode? And Reeva, man, like it or not, she's going to play a big part in this finale. I did mention it in my review of the last episode, the spoilers for the ending. If you haven't seen it, don't bother checking it out because I'm going to discuss it. But I was mostly right. I was about 80%, 85% right. But again, I'm going to talk about that later on. Well, they're still picking up the Last Jedi plotline with the craft being stuck without light speed and Vader's hot on their trail, and it kind of felt a little bit like The Empire Strikes Back when the Falcon can't get to light speed and they need to go through the asteroid belt and all that stuff. They need time to fix the ship, but of course they don't have it because it's the finale, so he wants to hand himself over to Vader to buy time. And wasn't that the strategy that he used last week with Vader and Reeva and the Inquisitors and all those stormtroopers at the base? Yeah, it just felt with the whole Last Jedi vibes last week, and there's still a bit of Last Jedi vibes this week, and the Empire Strikes Back thing with the asteroid. There's a lot of Star Wars tropes that are maybe a little bit too heavy in this episode, for me at least. And there are quite a lot of things that felt flat. Him saying goodbye to Leia didn't really work. After 6 episodes and her being the focus pretty solidly in the first 3, it just felt that there should have been more between these two. They do get a sort of final goodbye later on in the show, but for all they know, Obi-Wan was walking into his death. So considering that, yeah, I wasn't really feeling it between these two. Ewan McGregor is great, I just think it's the writing that's letting them down. And also, if you notice in these 6 episodes, little Leia never gets upset. She's a basic sociopath, we just haven't realised it yet. And there's a lot of questions hanging over this episode with how it's going to tie into canon and everything that's going to happen. And I'm going to get to that, but one of the big ones is, are we going to get Qui-Gon, or is he going to be Qui back? This is something that's been set up since the start of the series, and yeah, we do get a payoff for it, better or worse. But also, this series seems to be focusing, or at least this episode, on setting up is it Roken or Raken to do something else? Obi-Wan gave him a little bit of a speech, and I sort of thought, we're not done with this guy, we might see him again somewhere. But anyway, Obi-Wan tries to lure them away, but the General Inquisitor wants to focus on the others. And man, all the Star Destroyer stuff, the battle stuff when they're chasing both the ships, didn't work. The ship, the Star Destroyer, is really too big to move in any sort of exciting or compelling way. All they can do is shoot and they just miss. And in the little ship in front of it, sort of flying about trying to avoid it, just looked terrible. I've sort of kept quiet on this for most of my reviews, but there's been a lot of CGI in this show that's been not up to standard, and I thought they might pull it out for the finale, but I'm sad to say that they didn't. But anyway, Vader decides to face down Obi-Wan alone, but there's a lot to wrap up, as I said, and after 6 episodes we're going back to Tatooine, and we're getting Luke finally, and then we're getting Owen again, and they've decided to defend Luke against whatever's coming, but Owen and Beru against even a poor Inquisitor like Reeva, they're not going to stand a chance against her, and that's pretty much what happened. Now, a battle for the ages or a battle of the century is what we were promised from this show. The big reunion between Darth Vader and his old master Obi-Wan Kenobi. And the first one in episode 3, yeah, let's say it divided fans. I'm not too sure how I feel about it still. And this one, yeah, like, that was pretty dark, man, wasn't it? I'm not talking about the violence. It took a while to pick up. There's a rhythm to these fights that I think they maybe picked the tempo up too much in Revenge of the Sith, and that was over the top. This did feel a little bit more balanced and in line with what these guys are capable with, but it took a minute for the fight to get there. And then cutting between the two scenes that didn't really fit. And by that I mean cutting between Reeva hunting Luke and Owen and Beru on Tatooine, and then the fight between Obi-Wan and Vader. I said it at the start of the video, I know Star Wars started the whole multiple battles finale and it's kept doing it, but I only wanted to see one of these scenes. Butting back and forth took me out of both scenes because the tempo and the vibe was totally different. Also as well, we know that Owen, Luke and Beru will survive whatever happens. There was no real tension in the Tatooine scenes, and cutting between that and the battle that we've all been waiting for was a really bad decision in terms of the direction and the editing of this show. And where were my Jedi flippy flips? That's been a trope that's been going on in the most recent Star Wars films, but it seems in Obi-Wan that's been replaced with you have to have a lightsaber fight in the dark. And I know it looks good, but come on man, they could have put a bit more effort into these lightsaber fights that we're seeing. And when we do get the face-off, the dialogue here should just be important as the lightsaber battles. And while the lightsabering was cool, it did feel like the guys were shooting against the volume. You can literally see it at certain points. There's no real depth to certain parts of the scenes, and like I say, the editing is very choppy just in the battle scenes alone. And yeah, it's not great, it's really disappointing for me. I think the novelty of the volume is wearing off for a lot of people with shows like the Book of Boba Fett, this, Star Trek. There's a whole bunch of new shows that are coming out using it as well. As long as you don't use it too often, it's perfectly fine. But I mentioned earlier on, it's a battle of two halves, and Obi-Wan gets buried under some rocks. And I love that when he gets out, he's just leathering Vader with the Force. And while Obi-Wan was pretty much on top throughout the fight, it felt like he was more exploiting Vader's weakness rather than showing his mastery of the Force. But this guy is utterly savage, and one of the good things I will say about this show, how they have mastered or used the Force has pretty much been good. I mean, Obi-Wan holding back the window was a bit laughable, but the bits with Vader fighting Reeva and just using the Force last week, that's something I've always wanted to see in live action. And then here with Obi-Wan, yeah, I think we need to see more of this now. Special effects is at a level where it isn't this hard. Lucas tried it a little bit in the prequels, you know, with Dooku and Yoda at the end of Attack of the Clones. But beyond that, you know, Force users should be using the Force a lot more, if you ask me. And then when he gets him down and the mask or the helmet is off and cracked, it reminded me at the end of Spider-Man 1 after Tobey Maguire's face down the Green Goblin. And this is the moment that we've all been waiting for, and maybe that we all needed. And what shocked me was that Obi-Wan apologises. I didn't see it coming. But then it totally sort of pulls me back out is that Vader's explaining that it's him that destroyed Anakin Skywalker, so he destroyed him himself, so he does see himself as two different people at this point in his life. Obviously he goes back to being Anakin at the end of his journey, but I don't know, was this a resolution between these two characters? Because the way that the episode ends and the fact that they could easily do a season 2 means if this is the resolution, it felt a bit flat. And if they are going to go a season 2, then what was the point of doing it if they're just going to keep up the sort of antagonistic qualities of these two characters towards each other? But was this all worth the wait? Yeah, I'm going to get to that at the end. And then once he's sort of finished with Vader, he just beats him and fucks off and happens to sense Luke. And yeah, he gets back to Tatooine in like 30 seconds, and man, again, this show has made some bad choices when it comes to editing and direction. There's a lot about this show that doesn't work, but for me, Vader does. He's left a sort of pathetic mess, and the outcome of this fight should have been a set-up for the final battle between these two in A New Hope. But instead, it just felt like it was left on pause because they had to tie up the Reeva storyline, and then they can pick it up if they do get a season 2 or they spin it off into another format. But yeah, we're getting to the stage of the end where I was right, or mostly right, about the spoilers from last week. I didn't know how we were going to get there, I just knew that Reeva was going to end up in Tatooine, but all this felt rushed just to get to this point. Like, it all had to be wrapped up, and man, is the Reeva storyline going to divide a lot of people. As a character, she's been very divisive. I think as a villain, she's very much like Vader. She's been great, but she's not been used correctly. I've said it before and I'll say it again, they should have just given us an Inquisitor show with Reeva's story arc, or an Inquisitor's movie. That would have been great, and you could have just focused on the Empire and not had any Rebels or Jedi, or at least not really seen them or used them as main characters. But anyway, the whole Reeva and Vader thing felt unresolved. Look, there's going to be, or there needs to be more. So are we getting a season 2? This was sold as a limited series, but there's a lot of characters here that I say their arcs just don't feel like they were complete, that they've just been cut off. And a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, are going to say that this was the Reeva show, not the Obi-Wan show. And it sort of was until it wasn't. They've got a point, but I don't fully agree with that. And like I say, I love Reeva and I love Moses Ingram. But yeah, the whole thing where she tracks down Luke doesn't make any sense. She could have just asked Owen who this kid was. Why was he so important? She could have even asked Luke his name. If she'd done that, she would have known that he was Vader's kid. The ending that I heard was that she did discover who Luke was, then she had a redemption arc and went back to Vader and said that Obi-Wan was dead, and then he didn't believe her and killed her. So I guess that didn't happen because Reeva could pop back up, and probably is going to pop back up whether you like it or not. Personally, I'm looking forward to it, but if you're not, that's cool as well, man. It is a little bit like Lord of the Rings where we get a few endings. Even the ending with Leia where he tells her the bit about her parents and then he stops, that felt like it was unresolved. Why do this to all these character arcs? There isn't anything that's been clearly set up yet. And then at the last minute, they drop Qui-Gon, and it seems from what he says to Obi-Wan that they are going to be doing season 2. And if so, I think he's going to be playing a much bigger part. But again, with the fight for Vader, was this worth the wait? They could have brought him in earlier and had him, Yoda and Obi-Wan all together. And where was Yoda throughout this? I think that was a key missed opportunity as well. But if they do a season 2, yeah, I can see Obi-Wan going to visit Yoda, or at least Qui-Gon showing up on Dagobah. That is something that I would love to see, and why didn't you do it, guys? Why did you focus on this kidnapping plot that could have been resolved in 3 episodes? But yeah, I didn't really like the feel of the finale. Out of all the Star Wars shows that we've had so far, and maybe even all the Disney Plus stuff including Loki, this had the highest bar on it, and the most potential and weight on its shoulders. And at the same time, while the first few episodes had their issues, I really enjoyed them. And it was episode 4 where it got really lazy and sloppy for me, and it's never really recovered from it. I don't think the show had that many pacing issues. Yeah, they could have added a little bit more into the story and condensed other parts. But hey, we got what we got. But both adding to what we know about these guys and filling in some blanks as well, I don't think this show worked very efficiently in doing either. In my episode 1 and 2 review, I did say that this show was going to be an arc about Kenobi finding his faith again, and yeah, I was 100% right, it was, but the journey they took him on could have been executed a lot better. I liked this show, it didn't drag the same way the Book of Boba Fett did for me, and I think both this and Boba Fett proved you need to have a lot more than 6 episodes to tell these stories, or you could go the Stranger Things route and make every episode over an hour. Now, there was so much that could have been explored here that wasn't, and I'm going to do a full video on the season for later on in the week. But in the meantime, this is just my view, and if it does get a season 2, the perception or overall view of this show would probably change, and if it's a one and done, I'd say it's a disappointment overall with some great bits. But if they do decide to continue the show, depending on where they could go, it could be a lot more interesting, but you can't, I suppose, keep having Obi-Wan running into Vader when that's never really been mentioned. Maybe we could have Obi-Wan hunting down or looking for some other Jedis. That's something that is solidly set up from episode 1 in here, and I think it's a pretty good idea. But what did you guys think of the Obi-Wan finale? Did it live up to the hype? What would you have liked to have seen? Do you think they should do a season 2? And what would you like to see in it? As always, I've been Al, thanks for watching. If you've made it this far, please leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel as well.